There's a lot to love about video games. It's a relatively young medium, one that's still exploring its own potential, but one that's captured the hearts of millions of people in only a handful of decades. Considering how far electronic technology's evolved and how thoroughly developers are studying this medium as an art form, it's no surprise that fans have tightly gathered around these experiences and embrace what they do particularly well. Whether you've been playing video games for a few years or a few decades, you've surely found at least one game that's resonated especially deeply with you. For one reason or another, it's hit home. Whether it's the story, the gameplay, the atmosphere, something clicked with you. Something about it made you fall in love with the medium and want to find other games like it. Thousands of games are released every year, and though our backlogs grow more and more, many of us still find ourselves revisiting our old favorites. Not to say new games have nothing going for them, but it's not unusual to gravitate towards something that you know has captured your heart already. It's a security blanket, that comforting feeling that you're reestablishing a connection you made a long time ago. It's totally normal to have a favorite game. It's simply natural. So what's my favorite game? Do I really gotta say it? When looking through the lens of this young medium of video games, 1994 is a pretty long time ago. It seems strange to say that, but it's true. Platformers were running riot during the 90s, a far cry from the trends of our current day. Everyone was trying to grab a piece of the pie that Nintendo unleashed on the market in the preceding decade, and Sega was absolutely the strongest challenger that Mario had faced yet. Sonic the Hedgehog gave Sega a face worth remembering, and his early games on the Mega Drive, Sonic 1 and 2, quickly cemented themselves as iconic titles that Nintendo seemed at least a bit threatened by. There was some fear to be felt. The year 1994 proved to be a defining moment for Sega, who, after plenty of development challenges, unleashed one hell of a title, a firm, targeted challenge against Nintendo's Mario and one of the most important games to star their Speedy Blue hero. Not even having to divide the complete game into two separate cartridges and implementing a pretty goofy hardware gimmick were enough to diminish the sheer ambition that was pushed on this game. Sonic 3 and Knuckles, the true Sonic the Hedgehog 3, was Sonic in his absolute prime. To some, Sonic 3 and Knuckles is romanticized. YouTube in particular has struck a loud chord in treating this game as such a crown jewel for the franchise. It's a common talking point, and as a fan of Sonic games myself, I will admit that the noise can drown out the signal at times. But in a way, I still think that praise is justified. The Sonic fandoms endured throughout the decades, proudly announcing their adoration for the series, but also placing Sonic 3 and Knuckles firmly in the gaming pantheon. Why this game belongs there is actually pretty obvious. Sonic 3 and Knuckles, more than any game in the series before it, refuses to stand still. And while that seems like a no-brainer for a Sonic the Hedgehog game, that focus cascades throughout so many elements of this title. It's a vision so clear, but so natural when in practice, and one that makes this game my favorite. In my eyes, it's the very best that the medium can be. The fall of the Death Egg at the end of Sonic 2 was a powerful moment for the series, so it makes the direct continuation of Sonic 3 and Knuckles an even more striking statement right out of the gate, even having Super Sonic appear in the opening cutscene. Angel Island, where the Death Egg crashes after Sonic 2, holds the Master Emerald, which has the potential to not only reboot the Death Egg, but push it far beyond its original capabilities. Knuckles the Echidna, the noble but unfortunately gullible guardian of the Master Emerald, is tricked by Dr. Robotnik, attacks Sonic upon his arrival on the island. As Knuckles takes the Chaos Emeralds and hides them throughout the zones, this expansive journey across Angel Island begins. This opening cutscene is a loud announcement of just how different Sonic 3 and Knuckles is from what came before. You're not dropped into the first zone without context. The rush of Tails' planes skirting across the ocean toward the island, how Sonic leaps off the wing and transforms into Super Sonic only to be ambushed by Knuckles, you can instantly feel the gravity of the situation. Only after this cinematic does the game begin proper, and the decision to add this cutscene does a lot to paint a picture of what kinds of threats Sonic will experience on Angel Island. The urgency of dashing toward a new land by air, encountering someone so powerful that they can neutralize a superform in an instant, it's amazing how much can be told in a single cutscene, just seconds in length. When I say that Sonic 3 & Knuckles is this hugely ambitious endeavor of a game, one that makes its design priorities clear at its earliest opportunity, I mean it. It's an epic game. It's a game about motion. That cinematic scale gives Sonic 3 & Knuckles such a leg up amongst its predecessors. While it acts as an immediate follow-up of the events of Sonic 2, Sonic 3 & Knuckles keeps much of its chaos under control. Updated sprites and more ambient background designs contribute to this mood, no question, though advanced tech can only get you so far. In Sonic 3 & Knuckles' case, a major player toward this motion-focused drive is a more dynamic lens of progression. Before Angel Island Act 1 is even complete, the landscape is changed by Robotnik's army of fire-starting mechs, who torch the lush green jungle and leave it in a fiery state. It's a hard-hitting idea to have the boss at the end of Angel Island Act 1 be the very enemy that nearly destroyed the surrounding area, acting as Sonic's first major rebuttal to Robotnik, tarnishing his reputation to fool Knuckles. As a statement to show that Sonic is not who Robotnik says he is, it's a subtle narrative win, showing the hero immediately pushing back against a boss enemy that destroys Knuckles' home mere minutes into the campaign. Right from that first major in-stage transition, it's easy to see that Sonic 3 & Knuckles highly prioritizes its narrative, a much more overt drive to give its story a cinematic and epic vibe. In past games, the narrative's silence was its sound. The progressive flow from natural liveliness to mechanized dystopia may not have been the smoothest in its execution, but seeing what Sonic's world would be if he failed his mission was pretty easy to decipher as the player got further and further into the game. In that regard, Sonic 3 & Knuckles performs with far less subtlety. The game has what are essentially in-engine cutscenes throughout several key moments of the story. Even if the character can move or attack, you'll often be stuck experiencing a scripted event until the game decides to get things up to speed again. While I can see why this might seem like a step backwards to some, sacrificing that patient, silent narrative in the name of something more hands-on, Sonic 3 & Knuckles' story still speaks volumes. It's less about the format in which the story is told and more about the structure of the world contributing to that story. Angel Island, as a setting, is one of the greatest you'll find in the Sonic canon, one that always feels larger than life. The in-engine cutscenes often serve as transitions between zones, and this seamlessness of moving from one biome to the next is something that's easy to appreciate, giving the world a grandiose unity to its entire landscape. Having Sonic and Tails fall from the top of a waterfall at the end of Angel Island Zone down to the water-themed Hydrocity Zone is incredibly simple, but once the transitions stack and align throughout the well-paced narrative, it's clear that these disjointed regions are much further beyond that. For a game without a world map or hub to navigate, Sonic 3 & Knuckles is shockingly cohesive. Angel Island constantly feels like a singular location connected by threads of extremely strong environmental storytelling. The attack on Angel Island Zone halfway through its first act is a scripted sequence, one that's more of a visual alteration than a gameplay one, but one that gives the stages volatility. Stages in past Sonic games have had their differences in structure, but Sonic 3 & Knuckles shows how imperative the idea of change is toward its design and how that contributes to it on a narrative level. The third zone, Marble Garden Zone, takes things one step further, having various events reform the level itself. Robotnik and the Act 1 mini-boss cause earthquakes in the level, resulting in shaking ground that can crush Sonic if the player isn't quick enough. It goes to show that you really don't need to add a ton of entirely new assets to make a level feel like something different, and seeing these literal earth movers act as bosses that Sonic must defeat only makes this feeling of progression even better. Knuckles the Echidna acts as a major catalyst toward the more dynamic and cinematic elements of Sonic's campaign, as he impedes the Hedgehog's path in various instances, sometimes multiple times in a single zone. The cutscenes he appears in are probably the most impactful ones, giving the stages logical reasons to change, but also building up his role as a competent rival. Though he is easily fooled, a major narrative point that drives his partnership with Robotnik, Knuckles is crafty. He'll toss a bomb or burn a bridge to get in Sonic's way without hesitation, doing all he can to keep the Master Emerald out of the Hedgehog's hands. Even the opening cutscene where he attacks and disarms Super Sonic is pretty impressive, firmly establishing his purpose as a character that can meet Sonic on the battlefield and stand toe-to-toe with him. He's treated as a valid threat. But there is a particular moment that rings especially loudly regarding Knuckles' placement in the story. In Hidden Palace Zone, after Sonic defeats Knuckles in battle, the Echidna helps Sonic progress by smashing a wall with his fist and leading the hero to Sky Sanctuary Zone. At first glance, this moment is innocuous, but it foreshadows the game's most difficult character campaign. In Knuckles' campaign, he can break walls that Sonic can't, letting him enter unique passages and sections of the zones. For example, by breaking through rock walls in Angel Island Zone Act 1, Knuckles can explore the caves of the region in Act 2, where his signature gliding and climbing moves get plenty of use. The second acts of Ice Cap Zone and Launch Base Zone both take place away from the open air of Sonic's comparable second acts. While it doesn't necessarily need to be experienced in this order, that simple note in Hidden Palace Zone ends up mattering a lot, giving the player a reason to expect these new areas that Knuckles can access via his own strength. However, even more interesting is how naturally these are woven into the narrative progression of the levels. Most of Knuckles' levels use the same paths as Sonic, but with these alternate paths being visible in Sonic's campaign, it bursts down the door and makes the stages feel even larger and more layered than before. Sharing aesthetics is one thing, and that does matter, but the scope is heightened so much more when you realize that those simple barriers are actually hiding even more pieces of an already connected world. Similarly, another method of underlining this sense of narrative motion is the aesthetic distinction between the first and second acts of each zone. The cool indigo walls in the backgrounds of Hydrocity Act 1 contrast remarkably deeply with the louder, more intense fuchsia architecture in Act 2, adding to the scale of the second act and giving it a flashier, almost modernized vibe. Carnival Night Zone Act 2 has a literal nighttime section in its later half, brought about by Knuckles turning off the power in the area. Sandopolis Act 2 takes place entirely inside a haunted temple, differentiating it from the open desert air of Act 1. Lava Reef Zone probably has the most drastic difference between its acts, as Act 1's hot volcanic climate is chilled to cool blue in Act 2, then heating up again once the Death Egg approaches reoperation. This graphic distinction stands as a striking evolution beyond Sonic 1 and 2, which often let the hazard placements speak the loudest when differentiating between the acts. This deliberate divergence gives Sonic 3 and Knuckles a lot of surprises, but even more so, a constant sense that the world doesn't stay in a single lane. The same can be said of the musical themes, which share similar chord progressions and melodies between Act 1 and 2, but prove to be noticeably different. Sandopolis Act 2's theme sounds so much darker than Act 1's, with lower hums from the opening sensibly illustrating the eeriness of the ghostly tomb you're exploring. Lava Reef Zone's drastic shift in visuals is complemented by the sparkling atmospheric main melodies and jazzy percussion of Act 2, contrasting with the upbeat funk and pop vibes of Act 1. The slick, danceable Ice Cap Zone retains its club beats throughout both acts, but periodically drops out particular ranges in Act 2's theme to give it a much more atmospheric and serene musical palette. The fact that Sonic 3 and Knuckles balances variation between the act's themes while still preserving consistency is masterful in its execution. It once again drives home that mood of steady progression, a way to derive noticeable change as its adventure moves onward. Even in more postmodern contexts, narrative thrives on some form of variance to feel impactful. Whether it's a subtle shift in tone or a grand revelatory twist in expectations, these moments of volatility, the idea that something is going to be different, they're all strong ways to give breadth and scope to any kind of story. A lack of change is a lack of motion, so in a way it makes perfect sense for Sonic the Hedgehog of all things. This series has always been about motion, though the way this mentality translates to Sonic 3 and Knuckles on a narrative level is, while not entirely out of character, an ambitious exploration for its time. Sonic 3 and Knuckles really is the designers going all out in making a full-on epic for the franchise. There's something to be said about this creative attitude, as several of Sonic's most adored games have retained that cinematic, larger-than-life perspective. The adventure games immediately come to mind with their multiple characters and interlocking narrative, but Sonic 3 and Knuckles is a very different kind of cinematic than those 3D outings are. It may not have the most filmic of styles, but it feels like the world is still turning as Sonic and Tails explore Angel Island. How each interruption from its guardian is gripping and unpredictable, how each victory against its true villain's machines put the player one step closer to the story's confrontational climax. I've played a lot of games with excellent stories powering them, but Sonic 3 and Knuckles is so easy for me to appreciate in its simple but effective approach to storytelling that's only grown stronger and deeper as time goes on. But this imposingly ambitious narrative conceals gameplay that, admittedly, doesn't evolve its mechanics much beyond its predecessors. This is still Sonic the Hedgehog, a series that managed to get a whole lot out of a D-pad and 3 buttons that did the same thing. The clean and approachable inputs do wonders to introduce the player to Sonic's moveset, which aside from a handful of additions since Sonic 2, still has a very low skill floor. The ring system remains generous in keeping players from dying over and over, while the plentifully distributed shield power-ups offer some additional protection from hazards and some clever gimmicks. But the song remains the same. Get to the end of a level as quickly as you can, while keeping those rings in hand and avoiding whatever Robotnik throws at you. It's a tale as old as time for the series, but it does make Sonic 3 and Knuckles a bit less intimidating to jump into than other sequels, at least from a gameplay perspective. It may sound a bit backhanded to highlight how simple Sonic's gameplay has been throughout his 2D outings, but that approachability is something I don't think many other series of this tenure have matched. It doesn't take much practice at all to fully grasp the run, jump, and spin mechanics of this series, and Sonic 3 and Knuckles does a lot to make its skill room very easy to scale. But if the mechanics are so steady to evolve, it's up to the level design to pick up the slack. Sonic level design in the days of the Mega Drive is an interesting topic because it's never really melded into the most cohesive and convergent pacing. You've always had your moments of high-intensity spectacle, the loops and corkscrews highlighting Sonic's unmatched speed from Sonic 1 and 2, which don't have too much input from the player when in motion. Then you have the steadier platforming sections that require a bit more care and contemplation to successfully navigate. Coming together, these moments tend to clash, with a lot of peaks and valleys in the pacing. This definitely varied in prevalence throughout the different zones, but that perfect flow isn't something easy to uncover. It really does take a lot of digging to fully find the golden mean of pacing that the series' best moments embrace. Sonic 3 and Knuckles, though, manages to hit that ideal moment more often than you might think. The levels have plenty of loops and twists for a spectacular sense of speed, but grinding that speed to a halt is oddly uncommon, instead letting the acceleration gradually and comfortably unwind. One of the first major moments of spectacle in Sonic 1 is the spinning cave tube of Green Hill Zone, followed by a giant launch upwards to a cluster of rings. It's a simple but very memorable set piece early on, one that perfects that adrenaline-pumping sense of speed, along with a satisfying payoff at the end. Sonic 2 had moments like this as well, like in Chemical Plant Zone, but later levels like Mystic Cave Zone and Oil Ocean Zone were more methodical and patient in their approach. There weren't quite as many excuses to go fast, and when you could, the game really didn't know what to do afterward, ending up grinding you to a halt. Sonic 3 and Knuckles prioritizes its spectacle more openly than its predecessors did, with plenty of intense moments of speed and far fewer intrusions to that speed. Levels are more spacious, slopes more evenly placed, and the easy-to-use spin dash keeps things, quite literally, up to speed. The stage gimmicks also, for the most part, contribute to this spectacle. It's easy to point fingers at the more egregious level design offenses against Sonic's sense of speed, and while I'd argue that they are deserved to an extent, The biggest issue I have with them is that they don't really do much for Sonic. There are ways to distinguish levels from each other, and some have thematic ties to their respective zones, but do they really make Sonic look good? Do they prioritize his signature speed and style? That's a full-on debate for another day, but what Sonic 3 and Knuckles does especially well in this regard is focusing on the speed in its gimmicks. Spiraling up the inside of a giant tree or sliding down channels through an ocean temple might not offer a ton of agency, but they add dimension and scope, making the levels feel larger than life without kneecapping the high-speed pacing. While some gimmicks do feel a bit out of place, the arrow-shooting statues of Marble Garden Zone still puzzle the hell out of me. Most of the levels capitalize on providing uniqueness in their gimmicks, but also giving them a purpose that serves the quick and mobile antics of Sonic the Hedgehog. They don't feel out of place, instead serving the key goals of the design. There's a sizable portion of the Sonic community that champions skill mastery, the idea that getting better at the game is a major part of its design appeal. Internalizing the level layouts, instinctively avoiding hazards and enemies, and steadily trimming down that time are all big parts of why this series is beloved by fans. I get that, and Sonic 3 and Knuckles does exemplify that attitude. You're running around at the speed of sound, of course, but I don't think skill mastery is the only way to enjoy this game. Sonic 3 and Knuckles may still be about getting better and faster, like many Sonic games of all styles, but there's a more introspective mentality floating about its zones, one that feels very different than the games prior to it. One major contributor to this feeling is the special stages, specifically the Chaos Emerald challenges. These stages, like many Sonic special stages, are visual displays of console horsepower, dizzying and surreal dimensions that can disorient just as much as challenge. Getting the Chaos Emeralds in these stages isn't easy, but notably the giant rings that transport the player to these stages are tucked away in nooks and corridors throughout the various zones, encouraging exploration and introspection instead of just mad dashing to the end. The fact that these special stages don't require a minimum amount of rings to enter like in past games is also a very deliberate design choice, a way to keep players curiously learning about the level's secrets, but not requiring them to be super cautious in keeping those rings in tow. Hitting an enemy or hazard then losing your rings feels much more punishing in a game where rings value is so high, in this case as toll for entering a special stage like in Sonic 1 and 2. Sonic 3 and Knuckles, however, has more lax entry fees for these special stages, letting players focus more on feeling the rush instead of precariously ensuring all of their rings are in hand. This preserves the faster pacing of a Sonic game, but doesn't force the player to rely on skill mastery to vibe with it. Very much like its mechanics, the structure of Sonic 3 and Knuckles makes it a more approachable game, one with an even lower skill floor than normal. The multiple characters also contribute to this more introspective design attitude, as their unique skill sets add a ton of dimension to the gameplay. Sonic retains his speedy focus, though the Insta-Shield does allow some otherwise impervious enemies to be defeated if your timing is on point. Tails can now fly and swim, giving him easy access to higher paths and secrets, and Knuckles' gliding and climbing also provides him a great amount of versatility as well. The varied abilities each have a kind of vibe to them, but many regions of the stages allow for any of the three main heroes to explore them. Accommodating multiple characters in your stages without either of them feeling neglected is not easy to pull off, making replaying levels feel fulfilling and multi-dimensional. Knuckles' unique pathways do deviate from this direction a bit, and all three characters retain some moves like the spin dash, but overall, it's impressive how these unique skills incentivize replaying each stage in different ways. Once again, it's ambitious to see, resulting in some of the most polished and dimensionalized levels of the series. With its cinematic reach and more explorative approach to level design, you don't have to be a seasoned speedrunner to enjoy Sonic 3 and Knuckles. For a series that's remained dedicated to its own spectacle, that's actually very notable. Because if anything, its massive scope adds lean and muscle to the game's architecture instead of bloated fat. It builds itself up higher and higher, adding plenty of hidden corridors for curious players who appreciate finding secrets, but keeping its high-speed spectacle on full display for those who love getting faster and tackling their own personal best times. Regardless of what you value in a Sonic game or any platforming game, Sonic 3 and Knuckles will accommodate you. And that's not something many other games of this type can really accomplish. This massively ambitious adventure, for all its retained mechanical traditions, was unquestionably daring. A way to break from its own convention without alienating fans who've enjoyed the propulsive pace of Sonic 1 and 2. In striking that balance in its gameplay, Sonic 3 & Knuckles is still a resounding success. In 2025, during a time where the Sonic the Hedgehog series has circled around its past with unyielding dedication, something I've noted plenty of times already and criticized the hell out of, I think looking at Sonic 3 & Knuckles adds perspective to this grander critical picture. While it didn't deviate too much from the core gameplay mechanics of Sonic 1 and 2, Sonic 3 & Knuckles very much acted as a triumphant evolution of the series. Sonic wasn't like this prior to 1994. This giant leap was vast and transformative for the series, but even when brought under today's standards, I don't think any other game really approached Sonic the Hedgehog in this same way since. Sonic Mania came close, I'd admit, but even as fantastic as that game was, Sonic 3 & Knuckles remains a grander, more epic statement, a cascading story that felt larger than life from start to finish. And even looking outside of the Sonic box, we live in an era where Sonic the Hedgehog's lasting legacy is one of fondness and honorable iteration. Whether it's in 2D or 3D, this series remains influential, fueled by a collective of fans willing to add plenty of new spins on its best moments. I look at these series' spiritual successors, the Freedom Planets and Spark the Electric Jesters, and give them plenty of credit in their creative ethos, their design attitudes, paying tribute to Sonic the Hedgehog and other platformers like it. Hell, back in the day, I even said Freedom Planet surpassed Sonic 3 & Knuckles, a claim that I don't entirely agree with in 2025. Sure, it's easy to say Freedom Planet is a better experience after years of iterative research, but Sonic 3 & Knuckles is very unique in that respect. Any game can be improved if you really want it to, but in terms of serving its mechanical narrative and design goals, Sonic 3 & Knuckles is a success of the highest caliber. That's the reason it's my favorite game of all time, and why I struggle to obsessively dig for any discernible problem with it. That attitude just doesn't make sense in this regard. It's just not in me to do it. I've been making analytical YouTube videos for nearly a decade now, and over the course of those 10 years, I've learned a lot of lessons. Not just the logistics and more practical applications on YouTube, but I've learned a lot about myself. This strange journey has given me a lot of opportunities to look back at the 35 years I've been on this planet, how I was introduced to video games very early in life, eventually leading to a desire to examine this medium closely and hopefully understand it better. I'm steadily coming to terms with how much more I want to accomplish and, unfortunately, how far away I am from reaching whatever goals I'm working towards. When you're in your mid-30s, unmarried and without children, living through a day-to-day job as always, these thoughts come very frequently. It became so taxing that I ended up heavily limiting how many games I was playing. I was falling behind in new releases, and, in a way, I felt like I was falling out of love with this pastime that had become so important to my life. That spark was fading, and fading fast. But then one day, I booted up Sonic 3 & Knuckles. I watched that intense opening cutscene with the plane and Supersonic. Then I began spin dashing through Angel Island Zone Act 1. I instantly remembered the controls, the patterns of play that I had ingrained into my muscle memory over the course of decades. I remembered the lush greenery of the jungle, the swinging vines and zip lines, the giant ring behind the stone wall. It all came back to me. And taking on the boss that torched the first act of Angel Island Zone, then defeating it in a burst of fire, it felt oddly comforting. I was still finding so much to love about Sonic 3 & Knuckles. It didn't get old, it didn't feel dated or archaic. It was a game that, playing it in 2025, gave me the spark I needed to dive back into both playing games and making videos about games. It's a fantastic experience on analytical terms alone, but even more importantly for me, there's a sentimentality that fuels this game's appeal. It's not nostalgia, it doesn't feel that way. Sonic 3 & Knuckles, my favorite game ever, still feels relevant and essential, tightly holding its classic status that will never disappear. This game is not just a tight, spectacle-rich platformer. It's not just a naturally flowing narrative of epic proportions. It's not just Sonic's best game or even one of the best games of all time. It's a game I hold close to my heart, closer than any other title in this medium. It reinvigorated my appreciation for this art form, reminding me of everything I could ever want out of a game. Call it hyperbole, for all I know it might be, but in response to that, I say to just think about your favorite game. Think about what you love about it. Think of what it does exceptionally well in your eyes and how those proficiencies make you feel. Do they make you smile? Do they make you think about it more deeply? What about that game makes it your favorite video game ever? Because we all have our favorites, it's simply natural. My favorite is, has, and always will be Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Thank you for watching.